Guten Nachmittag und herzlich willkommen. Ich bin Birthe King, as you know. Ich bin dänisch und habe für mehr als 50 Jahre mit meinem englischen Ehemann in London gelebt. So, meine philatelistische Sprache ist Englisch und so meine Präsentation ist in Englisch. Bitte Question and Answers nach meinem Vortrag. And we're going to look at the importance of the non-philatelic material in open philately exhibits, because I found that that's something that a lot of exhibitors can find difficult. Because it's using the non-philatelic material that really makes open philately different from any other exhibition class. I will start very briefly on the first few slides to show you just a little bit about open philately as an introduction, and then I will go on to show examples of all these wonderful things that you can put into an open philately exhibit. There will obviously be more than the things I'm going to show you because it's open. And with open, we just means you can do all kinds of things. Finally, I will just show you a few examples from my exhibits so you can see what it looks like when it's all put on a page, when you have got both philatelic and non-philatelic items. Mainly the examples here are from my first and main exhibit, which is called Denmark, Conscience, Conflict and Camps, from 1932 to 1949, when Denmark was firstly occupied by Nazis, and then afterwards, as I say, after every war, there are refugees. So that exhibit has got the last frame about refugee camps, which I later developed into another 8-frame exhibit just about refugee camps in Denmark. And since we know there were refugee camps all over Europe, that was just a microcosm of that. And now we just see what it is in the rest of the world, which most of us would never have dreamt of could happen. So we'll get onto things here. And how did open philately come about? Started in Scandinavia, parallel with the social class. In Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and in the US, they have display class. They sound very different, but if you start looking at the guidelines, they are not actually that different. The FEPA got the open class, as it was called at that time, recognized as an experimental class in Singapore, but not until the Congress in 2012 in Jakarta was it recognized as a discipline, and it got the name open philately. There were a few amendments to those guidelines in 2018, and the latest is that the FIP Congress has decided to set up a commission for open philately, which is very important because at FIP level, there have been nobody to promote open philately. And that commission will be set up, we hope, at the Congress in South Korea next year. There are a few quotes here from the guidelines, and they actually says it all, that these guidelines have been drafted with regard to open philately to help the jury to judge the individual exhibits, but just as much to help exhibitors to develop their exhibits. It shows the dual aspects, which for me is the really important thing of philatelic and non-philatelic material. And of course, it must develop the topic in imaginative creative manner, just like you do in any other class. The few really rules, otherwise they're guidelines, is that 50% of the material must be philatelic. And up to 50% can be non-philatelic. That's not a requirement, but the variety of non-philatelic material is important because that really does influence the judging of both treatment and material. These are the guidelines for the evaluation and judging. And as you can see, they're very similar to the way they are in all the other classes, except slightly different from thematic. You've got the 30, 35, 30, and 5. And that's been very important to get it on the same, on par with the same other classes, to get it recognized as a serious philatelic exhibition class. So the principles can be found on the FIP websites. You go to regulations and guidelines and you click over on the right side, and a little bit down there, you'll find Open Philately. There are 3 to 4 pages depending on your printer, and that are the guidelines. There's nothing else, so that you can read it. There's not masses and masses of pages, but it does give very good guidelines on how you can put the exhibit together and how the judges will look at it. So which kind of material can be shown? Open philatelic exhibits can include all types of philatelic material included in all the other exhibition categories. And you can look at the strokes if you want to know more. And the non-philatelic material can include all types of items, except, of course, dangerous or prohibited material. But they must be relevant to the topic and so to illustrate it. The philatelic items must obviously be described in the proper philatelic way, so as they would have been in other classes. And the non-philatelic item must also be described and be relevant and also assist the development of the exhibit. There's just some of the things you can put in. And that is just a small part of what you can put in. So the variety of material, we'll go into some details, and maps are good, particularly if you exhibit outside your own country or in another continent. I normally joke and say, if I show it in the USA, apologies to my US friends, but you start with a map of Europe. That helps a bit. And then you can show a map of Denmark. This one is an example of all the places in Denmark where there were refugee camps after the Second World War. It's not entirely right. There are more smaller ones, but this is just in Denmark. More maps, I use that in the exhibit I'm showing here. And it's an original map, and it just shows Denmark, the peninsula of Jutland, and that was what then was part of Prussia and then Germany, which is the Schleswig and Holstein. Danish did have a Nazi party. They were not very good. They were not actually properly recognized by the occupying powers. The only thing they were good at were propaganda. They had their own propaganda press, and they did, I mean, you might not like it, but it's bloody good propaganda. They did these things, they're called Feldpost, and they look like proper stamps, and they sell for very good prices today. I think there was a booklet of them in an auction catalog the other day. My husband told me starting at 5,000 euros. Yeah, that's just 3 of them. But they're clever because they have got buildings that are very symbolic for the Danes. And they were, of course, illegal. But if you're lucky, you might be able to find one that has gone through the postal system. I've got one that's gone through the Danish, the only one that's known, and one that has gone through the German system.
But it's not for domestic usage.
No.
Stamps were they used within.
No, they are not recognized. They are not recognized as stamps. They are simply labels They are masquerading as stamps, but they should not be recognized. But as I said, you know, they have got the value there, which all stamps should have. And you do see them, but not going through. There are lots and lots of them on the market, and lots that are stamped after the war. So if you're interested, be aware of that. I love this postcard. It's from 43. Again, it's a Danish guy in the Nazi uniform, but there was a Danish military corps called the Frikorps Denmark. And of course, he's got the Danish flag, he's got the armband, and he's got a Christmas parcel from the home front, wrapped the same way as Denmark at the time would wrap their Christmas presents. Ephemera, some countries haven't got the word ephemera, but it's basically bits of paper that people normally throw away, but we keep them. And this is a note from a Danish prison saying that we have got your husband in prison. Can you please send some ration coupons? And there's some examples of ration. This is for butter and this is for rye bread. So again, it's things, more ephemera. Handmade postcard, obviously only one of a kind, because it was made in the only internment camp the Germans had in Denmark, just north of the border. And they promised that the prisoners would never be sent to the concentration camps. Needless to say, they were lying. It's never been in the mail. I figure it was made by one of the inmates there to one of his friends in one of the other barracks, but, you know, imagination. ID card you can use in almost any way. This is for the wife of a Danish police officer who were interned in Buchenwald. The refugee camps in Denmark that I just mentioned, you can find, if you're lucky, ephemera. This is original duplicated list of camps in Denmark at a certain time. And then there are others. This is January 46, and I have got June 46. And then you can see which camps have been amalgamated, which ones have been closed, and new ones set up. And that's quite interesting for research purposes because you've got the original ones. Do you mind waiting to the end? Because we've got to watch the time. Thank you. And this is a rule for German refugees, obviously in German, for how they should behave in the camps. And another, really a piece of ephemera. It's very fragile, but it is a search from a prisoner of war, well, interned, whatever you want to call him, in a Danish camp. He's there with his daughter, and they are asking about where his wife and mother is. And this comes back and say, well, we have tried to find out, but we don't know. If we find out anything, we will tell you. So you get lots of histories behind these bits of paper. That was from the camp at Ry, and I was lucky to get a number of items from a correspondence as a collection from a dealer who knew I collected this. So it's a lot of lovely stuff to have. Flyers, the RAF dropped lots of flyers over Denmark. They dropped a lot over Germany as well. Very, very similar. I chose this one for my exhibit because it's from a speech Churchill made in Parliament on the future of a United Nations and a European Union. And quite interestingly, when I used to show this, you say, God, did Churchill really say that? But now journalists, of course, are going back in the archives, and lots of the speeches Churchill did is about United Europe and how it's the only way Europe can work. And I don't think the Conservative Party has read very much of that. Yes, another one, a smaller item. And that shows a picture of a Danish conservative politician who had to flee to London quite early on. And he was leading the Free Danes in London.
Is that novel related to the shipping company?
No, no, no. He's called John Christmas Møller. He was quite famous, but it's got nothing to do with the mask. Leaflets as well was dropped, and this one shows the front, greetings from England, and this is the inside, and it explains a very famous raid that the RAF did on the second largest town called Aarhus. They bombed the university 31st of August 44, and you see, obviously a lot of information is in the leaflet. 24 Mosquito bombers, 12 Mustang fighters, and another Mosquito to photograph the events. So that's why we have got it here. And what is good for the research is reading books about it. And if you have a topic where you can find lots of literature, not just philatelic, but stories that the people that were involved have written in biographies and autobiographies. And from here, I know that some of the German guards was scared stiff, and one of the resistance fighters who were in prison there got the keys. And before it all kind of burned up, he rushed around and opened the door. So lots of Danish resistance fighters actually escaped there. And I've got that from an autobiography from one of the people who were there. And that just adds to the story. When you didn't find this, you can put in. These lots of these little drops were masquerading as little storybooks, kind of just half the size of this. So they're very small, and there are a few pages. And this one says, winter reading, books of the autumn. But inside, it's we will win. And then they explain in Danish what's going on in the rest of the world. It was uncensored. So it's brilliant. And there are lots of them. Well, it's Christmas. You've been out getting the Christmas tree. And our Danish forests. And a travel slogan, travel with the Danish railways. I mean, if they can't, the Germans, I can't believe it, but they're quite fun. Censorship, it's not in this sense philatelic, because that is censorship, and you have this little sign that is a censorship. Not very many are known. I think there are about 3 of them known in Denmark at the moment, but you never know, someone might find one. And similar telegram censorship, there are various versions of that one, but that counts as ephemera as well, because it has not been through the post in that sense. And a booklet that tells all about how it became more and more difficult to communicate because the telegraph and the telephone service had censorship. Medals, which you do see in a number of exhibits today. That one is, I was very lucky. I got one where we have got the whole provenance. And then a little bit later, another one came up that was much cheaper because it did not have the provenance. But my husband said, well, actually, if you have got the front, then you can show the back. And there was, it's to celebrate the 16 Danish soldiers that died on the 9th of April when the Nazis came over the border. They were in southern Jutland and they hadn't received the message from the king and the high command that the Danes should not resist because they wouldn't have a chance, which they didn't, because Denmark had declared itself neutral and there was no sensible armed forces to resist. So these 16 soldiers died. And so I got the one that says 19th of April, 1940. gain participation in Allied War Service. Not that's expensive. These are reasonable, which is why I can show both sides, which is it's quite nice. And another one when they're special services to Denmark. And of course, very attractive Danish Red Cross, because it's in enamel, so it's really nice. Coins, propaganda coins, so to provide funds for the resistance movement, and the translation is "wall have ears," so you know, don't just sit and chat. That's really fun. It's a coin. It's defaced, which of course is illegal. But I have been told by people who were there that this was done at the then greatest Danish shipbuilding company called Burmeister & Wain in Copenhagen. And the workers there were mainly trade union organized by the Communist Party, which was quite strong in Denmark during the resistance movement there. And when on one side it said, "Let Denmark live," and the other one says, "Down with Hitler." This one is a 2 øre, and I was also told there should be a 5 øre, but I've never seen it. This was in a stamp catalog, and I said, "That's really exciting. I really would like that." He said, "Well, do you think somebody else wants it?" Nobody had noticed it. Sometimes you're really lucky. That's for the camp I mentioned just north of the border of Frøslev. There's now a fantastic museum just across the border from Germany. And that is a picture of the postcards. That was not a postcard that I've just shown you. It was a guard tower, and that's preserved there again as almost a logo for that. And it's not a medal, it's not a coin, it is simply to commemorate one of the first and largest and most important resistance groups in Copenhagen called BDPh. Pins and labels. After the liberation, there were little pins. And that one was born by a resistance fighter. I know that because it was given to me by his son as a present to put in my exhibit. And here I had this little pin here, and then I was looking in some junk pile, some stall, and there was a label, and there was the exact image of that one. And that was quite fun. And again, a label for a medal with ribbons, Denmark's fight for freedom, and a label. And nobody except elderly Danes, I would say, will recognize this, but it's a very famous song that was done during the war, and it is simply a hymn to freedom. And it's for those who knows about it, it's quite emotional, and there are 3 verses. And if you get to any of these commemoration events, they will definitely know that and sing that. I will not try to do that. And again, a very attractive commemorative brooch. So you can find, they're all different, but and you don't know where you find those things. If you go to a dealer and say, "Have you got something like this?" and say, "What? No, it's not Philatelie." So, go to other kinds of fairs because you can find stuff. We've also in Britain got the word Cinderellas, and people say in Denmark, say, "What is that?" And I say, Cinderella is the fairy tale of Cinderella, because these things they don't fit into anything, because they're just labels, stickers. And this one goes back to 1930s, and it's quite strong. The Social Democratic Party was quite strong there. And you can find really nice ones in support of fascism, referring to the Spanish Civil War. And that is from, as you see, War Resisters International, but it is the Danish version, Aldrig mere krig, never more war. And of course, a very, very nice Danish Nazi Party. And again, the symbolism is very strong. You've got the Danish, famous Danish flag, Dannebrog in the background. You've got the soldier. That's what we want you to be, but referring to the Danish Vikings. And these symbols that can be quite emotive. And the opposite from the Danish Conservative Party youth section, which was fairly out on the right at the time. Yesterday Nazism, today communism, because there was no love lost between the Danish Communist Party and the Danish Young Conservatives. But again, it's stories, if you know them, you can really appreciate it and you can fit it into exhibit, and it makes your philatelic material come alive when you've got these things in between. And that's what I think is so exciting about Open Philately, that you can get all this, the social aspect in and the human aspects. A few more Cinderellas, again, a Danish Nazi label advertising meetings. There were quite a few of those. Another one, Denmark Wake Up. And there's all the known Christmas stamps. Danish Christmas stamps have been around for a long time. They were the first Christmas stamps in the world, and they are very famous. And of course, you've got the Danish little fir branches with cones, going again in various versions, and the live candles. And they were used, and you can find them. And I have got them both like that and used on cards. So that's a bonus. Illegal papers, there are a lot. And I'm surprised that I still find them on Danish auction sites today. And I've just got a book I picked up here, which is a list of all the illegal papers that were produced in Denmark during those 5 years. And I did not know there were that many, but there's a book about it. And I said, well, that would be really important because I can tick off those I've got. That one I really love. They're all duplicated, by the way. If some of you know the foolscap paper that we used to have with stencils and duplicators, but this one shows General Eisenhower, Field Marshal Montgomery, Christmas Møller, the Danish representative in London, together with the then English Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden. And how many more famous people involved in the Second World War can you find on one sheet of an illegal paper? And these are labels that were kind of sold to people who supported the resistance movement so that they could actually print these illegal newspapers because it costs money. This is produced by the Communist Party. They are the same size as the little boxes of matches that everybody had in their pockets because everybody was smoking in those days. And of course, you can see that's Stalin. So, you know, it was a CP thing. Money, just 2 examples. This one used by the German occupying forces in Denmark, not that they paid a lot for anything, they mainly took. And this is what the Allied Command issues later on in 1945. They are pristine and they are around, but they were not really used. And then what I call just stuff. Armband. In 1945, there was no government, there was no police, there was nothing in Denmark. So for a very, very short period, we are talking days, the Danish resistance movement simply took over because they were the only armed Danes there. So to make sure that there was law in the country that there weren't too much reprisals. So there are lots of different kinds of, blue and red and white stripes. Just like the RAF. And here you've got, there's a series of photographs, and the woman there is wearing a little hat. And there's a Nazi officer there who is telling the Danish policeman, that is illegal, and you've got to give her a warning. I was very proud to get that in an auction within the last year. Sometimes you're just lucky, but I saw that one, and when Chris spoke to the auctioneer, he said, "I think it's the best item in my auction." There were other things, and it went for massive amount, but that was okay. My mother didn't have one of those, but of course it was illegal. These ribbons are very precious. You can see again, it's the red, white, and blue. And again, I know that it was sewn by a wife, probably on the 4th of May, when Denmark got the note across the BBC sending to Denmark radio program at 8 o'clock in the evening that the German forces had surrendered in North Germany and Denmark and Holland, right? Yeah. So she sewed this so her husband, who was in the resistance movement, could pin that on his coat the next morning. It was the same as a little pin I showed you earlier, and the family said, give that to Birthe. So that is really special because I know it was worn on the 5th of May, 1945. And that's a pair of earrings. That was another present. I've been helping at an exhibition, and afterwards, one of the organizers said, "Oh, I have seen these. I'll go and get them from that shop, and you can have them." So I expect they were not worn until after 45, though. But they're fun. So you can put fun things in, and it kind of enlightens what could be a serious topic as well. And show the knowledge. It's the other thing. It's not important to have lots of exciting non-philatelic material. You've got to show the knowledge about it as well. And if you've got provenance, of course, that's important. There is a booklet which does help. It's not, of course, you keep finding new things, but it's a good reference. And they often say that where it was produced, but we know that that was in 43. Again, another story, and if you know more about your topic, you can find out. This is a whole sheet of labels, and you can see I've written there, it's for the benefit labels. People could buy them, and the money went to Gestapo victims. And the same little verse is the one you see on a first day cover. I don't normally recommend to use more than maybe 1 or 2, perhaps 3 in an exhibit, but sometimes the illustrations are just too good to miss. So it's there, and it's on a first day cover in 47, say 4th of May 47, and that's the 3 stamps that were issued for that. The poem is written by a very famous Danish poet, writer, and vicar. He was murdered by a Danish Nazi terror group that worked under the Gestapo. He was in his vicarage, and they came in the morning on the evening of the 4th of January 1944. They took him and they drove around a bit, Then they shot him 3 times in the head and ditched his body just at the side road. It was then found by some workers that were biking to work the next morning, and they knew who he was because he was famous because he's been standing up, preaching and writing against Nazism. It's very close to where I was brought up, and initially there was just a wooden cross, and then later on he got a really, just a simple granite cross. And I know today they have actually moved it into a little park. But as children, when we were driving past, we always had to slow down and look at the granite cross. So if you have personal reminiscences, you can put in as well. It's great, particularly when you're talking about your material. Original photographs. This is a press photograph you can see from the official archives, and it says so on the back. The typed bit is on the back, and it's the arrival of Montgomery in Copenhagen. That one is a dirty little piece of a flyer, so it doesn't get very much on quality, but it was a handbill, as they say. It was distributed by one of the other big resistance groups in Copenhagen, because the Danish armed forces were interned in 1943. But normally, when there is a royal birth, you have a cannonade. But of course, that was forbidden. So they thought they would send this out. And unless you know that the Danish heirs to the throne had a daughter born in 1940, present Queen Margrethe, and her sister was born in 1944. So you find out that that is to celebrate the sister's birth. So an example showing knowledge. I often get asked about use of non-philatelic, non-original material. And this is what it says in the guidelines at the moment, that you should use original if at all possible. For instance, the illegal newspaper I showed you, it's a size that can't go in, not even in an A3 sheet. So what I do is I have a nice scan on the front, and then I write the original is on the back of this sheet, and I put the back sideways. It's a way of doing it. I haven't had judges complaining about it, and I don't know if they have ever asked to see the back of it in an exhibition to see if it's there, but it is a way you can do it. Because sometimes there are things that are important and they are locked up in libraries and archives. What I have also done is, if I know it's there, I write and say, can I have a photographic copy? I will pay for it. And they are normally very happy to help. It's amazing how much help you can get in archives and museums, because they love when people come and ask them for things. And of course, books, magazines, you can scan items, which I have done from an archive. They say, well, we have got these pictures in a book. Would you like to buy the book? Would I like? Of course I would. And just a quick warning, internet, cross-reference all the time. But I think, most of you are experienced, so you know that you do that in whichever class you work in. This is an example of a non-original picture. He was very important for the Danish prisoners of war who lived in North Schleswig at the time, which was German. And this, I just credit this because it says on the internet that you could use this picture provided you told where you had it from. So I figure that's probably okay if one doesn't overuse it, because I've seen that done as well. But, a couple of times I think you can get away with this. So how do you distribute the philatelic and the non-philatelic material? It comes in, and I'll just show you a couple of examples from pages. This is what it says at the moment in the guidelines. it's very difficult. You get asked, how do you find out if you got 50-50? Do you count it? Do you measure it? No. Stand back and look at it. The relationship should not necessarily be half and half, but the overall should be. And I should just say that the exhibit I'm showing here goes absolutely against the guidelines. And I know it's a weak point, but it's my story. Because the way it is, there's not very much or no non-philatelic material because it starts in 1864. But I've got some quite good philatelic material. So I put a few really nice postcards in, kind of German Grußaus cards, and they're always lovely, just to kind of spice it up a bit. And then the second half is very much illustrative material and postcards and photographs. So it's weighted almost in a half of philatelic item and half in non. And that is not what the rules say, but that's what my material does. So, there are guidelines, and you can decide if you want to have large goals, you follow the rules. If you want to tell your own story and you don't mind if you get a few points less, you can just do what you want. And don't just put a few things in. I've seen, particularly some years ago, people wanted to try open philately, and then thought, well, I've got some nice postcards. I'll put a handful of postcards in, but that does not make an open philately exhibit. The more variety you have got, the better, which is why I've shown you so many different things, and you might be able to find more. This is the second page in my first exhibit. And here you can see I've got postcards, I've got labels, I've got philatelic items, I've got a dirty letter from the Spanish Civil War, but I like it because it says that this guy was in the tailman battalion. And I know he got on convalescence in a hospital in Spain, but that allowed me to actually get this German mini sheet with tailman, who of course was a communist, and he succumbed in one of the German concentration camps. So this is quite nicely divided, not quite 50-50, but okay. Here you've got the two medals. You've got just a bit of a postcard there, but all the rest is non-philatelic. But it still works for me. This is a photograph of some of the young soldiers, and these are the commemorative stones. And I say, well, as always, the first ones that get into the war and get killed are the young ones. And there's a page where you can see the Christmas stamps there. I've got them on cover there. That's the one I showed you. And there are others, again, all very symbolic. And there we've got it in the front and you've got it on the back. So sometimes the prices go high, otherwise you can be lucky and catch some. There was internment of British and US citizens from the 9th of April. And then you can find good stories there and philatelic stories. So these are all philatelic, except for that one with a card enclosed there. And you can find stories about that. So that is fairly philatelic. That one is not, but because the King Christian tense was very known, I needed to have a page with that. That's my parents' songbook that they used. And then you just got labels and pins, a postcard that shows the front. So it's a non-philatelic item and another label there. But it works because then our other pages are fully philatelic. In here, I've shown you these and the labels, and then I've got an important letter there that's got an important philatelic mark. And again, there, non-philatelic. Then I have a few stamps, not a lot, because I'm a postal historian. But then I've got 3 important letters there, so the page works for me. That was the date that was the real turn in Denmark. The occupying powers called a state of emergency. There have been lots of strikes which they didn't like. So they had a state of emergency. And here you got a flyer, postcard, and his vice admiral, because he got a message. So he told the whole of the Navy, if you can't get the ships to Sweden, you scuttle them, which they did. So the Nazis got only a few. And this is one of these little booklets I showed you earlier, and you can see how they're scuttled there. The story of the Danish Jews also needs to be told. That's quite well known, and films have been made of the story. It's fairly philatelic. That one looks philatelic, and it is, but it's the inside that's important, because it says in that letter, he's a young man who is going home, been out in Copenhagen, and then he goes down to the harbor, and they're just having the illegal little boats that went across the Sound to Sweden to help the Jews to escape. And he said, oh, we helped carry the suitcases down to the boats. And that's, for me, it was just a brilliant thing to have, because it's a story. That comes out of the philatelic item there. But, you know, you get good stories if you have got letters inside your envelopes. We used to be able to find that because the dealers didn't look, but they do now, unfortunately. And there's another little stamp there that actually shows the boats going across the sea. And again, the Danes have made a number of films of those things. Perfect philatelic, not a non-philatelic, but you know, when you look at a whole frame, it normally works out. And these are simply illustrating why letters were returned, like around the 9th of April 40, and when the Nazis walk into Russia, to USSR, as it was, then it's returned, and then after Pearl Harbor, things are returned. So there are specific dates. So if you know your history, you can find items that illustrate that. And there you've got the item of the illegal newspaper. And there's a philatelic item there, but all the others are non-philatelic. But it's okay. And you've got sabotage here, and that looks quite non-philatelic, but in actual fact it isn't, because that's artwork. There was a competition. These are the items in the competition. These are those that were actually chosen. There's the BDPh thing, and that's an original photograph of a railway sabotage. And that's the bit from a railway sabotage. I can't prove that it's there, but it could be from another one, from Northwest Jutland, because the trains went up there, and it was great if you could derail some with provisions going up through Jutland to go to Norway. Yes, we are just getting to, got internment of police, and you've got philatelic and stamps and white buses coming to take the Danish and Norwegian POWs from the concentration camps and taking them to Sweden in the spring of 45. And we got liberation, stamp, and that's about it. But that is the liberation. You got the king and you got Denmark liberated. In their photographs and some, yeah. And again, personal photograph got from the archive in the town where I knew it was. It's personal, but I knew that because that's the town where my parents lived. And there you got the ribbons. These have got letters inside and they're long written and they are fantastic. They describe the evening of the liberation. So you get more information there. It's philatelic, but you have got the social story behind. I mentioned the refugee camps, again, artwork and photographs. It's the first page of that. And then this is from the exhibit that I'm showing here. And again, it's pure non-philatelic. As I say, towards the end of that exhibit, it's non-philatelic, but it's okay. That's my last page of that exhibit. And I was very pleased that my commissioner could get it in the frames because again, I was a bit on the naughty side because that is deeper than 5 millimeters, but the perspex could just bend enough. And just for fun, that was the Danish Nazi leader. And you can see that he was fun. And that was why, he was incompetent and the occupying powers didn't reckon with him. And this was what was fun. Again, that is a recent acquisition and it's going to stay like that because it's just for fun.